This is Paul Murray Live.
Thank you, King. Always a pleasure to follow you here at 9 o'clock each and every night. We'll see you at the same time.
Possible. But it's a massive success story for two Sydney-siders and proves good ideas can translate into a huge payday. Which brings me to the thought for the night. Never confuse a single defeat for a final defeat. That's it from me. Paul's up next. See you tomorrow night. Good night.
This is Paul Murray Live.
Thank you, King. Always a pleasure to follow you here at 9 o'clock each and every night. We'll see you at the same time tomorrow night here on Sky News. Tonight, how's this for a lineup on the show this evening? We've got Rowan Dean, Matt Canavan. They'll be here for a dose of no sooks, no lefties. Nicole Flint and Sam Crosby will be here as well because we know you love seeing them on a Monday night. And our dear friend Jacinta Price will be here with our other dear mate in the United States, Annalise Nielsen. Just a taste of what you're going to get. And here on Sky News Regional, you get 2 hours of Paul Murray Live each and every night. So spread the word. You can see it every night on Sky News Regional, Foxtel, and all the highlights at skynews.com.au. Now, remember when they used to say that Sky News is too small to matter? Well, now the same people with the same axes to grind now say that when it comes to the internet, we are too big to exist. As you've heard by now, big tech is coming after what you can see online from what you see here on Sky News each and every evening, particularly in prime time. As you know, we can't post anything to YouTube for a week. Now, this gives me the chance to say 3 things that really matter to me. 1, you can get all of the videos from all of the shows and all of our amazing news coverage at skynews.com.au. Make it your homepage, get all of your content there, no ifs, no buts. And 2, I'm proud to work here. I believe in this place, and I love the strong people who work both on and off the camera. As you know, this show is one where we have tried to and have shown you the sources on the screen behind all of the COVID data that we use and how that data informs the debates that we have had since this thing got out of control in China. Remember, there was a time when big tech censored anyone who said that the virus had leaped from a lab. They said back then it was a conspiracy theory. They banned you from YouTube for saying it back then. Now, even the President of the United States thinks it's a pretty good possibility. And 3, don't forget, there is always a bigger issue at play. Put simply, because we push back, some come after us. They'll use any excuse. I will not have this place defined by the people who have always hated us or the media rivals who have been stung by our success. We are fearless, and that creates enemies. We are strong, and that sends those enemies nuts. And we are mainstream. That's because while they are shocked by election results, we see them coming because we are in the real world, not the media bubble. I, like you, care about what makes Australia great, and I'm thankful to the generations who got us here and use this show every night to fight those who want to turn all of that upside down. We do this for you, and you can always count on this program and Sky News to tell it to you straight, no matter who it upsets or what enemies it annoys. The future is too important to let them win or tell lies about us while they try. Now, a few things to mention about COVID today. And again, I've read all of your emails, seen lots of the stuff that's on the Facebook page, which is we're probably at times maybe shown too much and talked too much about all things and all of the different angles on COVID all day, every day. And I understand how relentless lockdown can be. Shout out to everyone in southeast Queensland right now who are joining Greater Sydney in lockdown, and people in Melbourne who no doubt feel that there's one always just around the corner. But there are a couple of things I have to mention before we move on to everything else, including this disgraceful treatment today of a mother of a couple of kids. She's apparently a single mum, so obviously there was no other option than to take her kids with her when she went to buy the essentials for her family. This is what she was confronted by a security guard.
I'm a single mother of 2 children. So, come on. No, I don't. No, I don't.
That's very unfortunate.
It is unfortunate, and that's why I have to bring them with me.
Yeah, well, There's nothing you can do if you haven't got any friends, is there?
No, obviously not. So that's why they're with me.
So, yeah, you just need to tell the police that.
Oh, you're ridiculous. Come on, kids. Come with me. Come on. Look, you're making my children uncomfortable. Yeah, it does.
Now, clearly, that bloke didn't know what he was talking about. That woman is able to go to the shops with her kids for the most obvious of reasons. Because, of course, the rules in New South Wales do state that only one person is allowed to go shopping at any one time, but that's a reference to adults, not people who have no other option but to take their kids with them. But I'm sad to say that while this bloke did the wrong thing, no question about it, he's now paid with his job. Because, of course, as soon as something gets anywhere near the internet, well, everyone has to pay. This contractor, according to the people who run that shopping centre, has since been removed and will not be returning to Imperial at Gosford. Now, again, should this bloke have lost his job in a pandemic? I don't think so. Should he have been given a verbal kick in the backside? You betcha, but come on. Our staff and contractors are expected to observe the New South Wales health guidelines while ensuring that customers feel safe and welcome in our centre. We apologise that this was not reflected during her visit. As for the scoreboard, and sadly, COVID is a scoreboard because it is about the number of cases, it is about the number of people that have been vaccinated. Here's where we are this Monday night. 3,144 people in Australia currently are active COVID cases. Now, according to all of the health information that we have read, seen and heard, about 99% of people will have a mild experience. Yes, it gets serious, which is why 295 people are currently in hospital. 59 of them are in ICU. Almost all of the ICU people are currently in New South Wales. To the good side of the coin, 12.3 million people have at least got one dose right now in Australia. There are some double doses in all of that, but it's good. 12,393,000 doses that have been given. Sorry, not people, doses that have been given. That's 76,000 up in 24 hours. Sundays are always a bit lower, but that number will absolutely supercharge tomorrow. It means Australia right now has a vaccination rate of 19% fully vaccinated. Now, after National Cabinet, states and federal government agreed, 70% is the mark that we have to go to. So let's update what is happening in your part of Australia. Tasmania and the Northern Territory leading the country right now, the ACT not far behind with almost a quarter of their populations fully vaccinated. About 44% of people in New South Wales have only got single vaccination at the moment, so that's going to jump up really quickly. But right now it's 19%, which is the same for Victoria and South Australia. Queensland is on 18%, and I'll have a bit more to say about their Chief Health Officer and her outrageous views when it comes to AstraZeneca in a second. And WA back of the pack, almost a full 10 points behind the ACT and the Northern Territory. As for the global situation, now remember, there are parts of the world that are fully reopened, but they are nowhere near 70%, let alone 80%. Singapore, the United Kingdom, the United States, particularly the United Kingdom and the United States, well, they have been able to get to an opening, not just because of the high vaccination rates, but put simply, the number of people going to hospital and the death rate is nowhere near as bad as it was this time last year. In Japan, where the Olympics are on right now, 28% of people have been vaccinated. Australia at 19%. And New Zealand, you notice they never want to mention Queen Ardern when she is not outperforming Australia, but that is what's happening right now in New Zealand. And remember, in New Zealand, they don't have state governments. So what is going on there? Our lockdown target, doesn't matter whether you think it's too high, too low, or just right. It is 70%. We have to get there. As for what happened when it came to the different states today, remember when Gladys Berejiklian during this lockdown said this about schools.
Schools are safe, but what is not safe is having hundreds of thousands of people leaving home at around the same time, dropping kids off, picking kids up. That level of interaction is always a concern for us.
Now, of course, it's garbage. You can drop kids off without mingling with other parents. You would be able to stay in the car. Older kids would be able to catch public transport, and they should be back in school for all of the obvious reasons. But today there was a bizarre statement which was given by the Chief Health Officer, who has way too much input into the decision-making process right now in New South Wales. By that, I'm not suggesting she doesn't have a say, but she needs to give advice to Cabinet, not be in Cabinet all the time, telling them about what they should or shouldn't be doing. That's not the role of a public servant. If you want a place in a Cabinet, put yourself on a ballot paper, get yourself elected, then become a minister, and then you get to make the decisions. But the Chief Health Officer in New South Wales, Dr Kerry Chant, who, yes, is dealing with a pretty serious situation, particularly in southwestern Sydney, is openly talking about the idea of homeschooling till the end of the year.
How realistic is it that children go back to school this year?
Look, it really depends on the numbers. You know, we are hoping to see a turnaround in the numbers.
Well, numbers in what? Vaccinations, case rates? As I've shown you multiple times off the data that New South Wales Health provides us, local governments are the indication of what's happening in your area. Mystery cases, the lack thereof, or very small number in areas that are still locked down are why those areas should be able to have contactless drop-off of kids going back to school. And while I'm often very critical of my fellow mates in the media, well done to Channel 9 tonight. Their lead story tonight was a story about kids needing to go back to school. I know Channel 7 has done the same, but well done for that coverage tonight. It is a vitally important issue. And the Premier realised that perhaps the advice that was being given needs to be pulled back just a little bit when it comes to kids in areas where the virus is not on the march.
I think our priority is getting people back to school and back to work. Can I make that very clear? So I think there's merit in us considering how quickly we can get people back to school and back to work.
Now, as for Queensland, there was a disgraceful thing said today by the Chief Health Officer in Queensland while the lockdown was extended there. But I've got to say it was rather difficult to actually get to what she was saying because so often she was talking about herself.
I haven't found the missing link. I am very confident, but I don't know that I've found in the cluster. I do have PCR, so I don't think that's the avenue of spread. Yes, of course I do. I am still concerned. I think it's important, so I will be going and seeing my GP. I want the people, I'm very, very concerned. I have spoken to our hospitals. Let me see what happens over the next few days. And if it was me, I would be very grateful if I got admitted to any one of those 4 hospitals.
I think it's not all about you, but that's the next Governor of Queensland, rewarded for her efforts in dealing with, and in my view, making some rather heartless decisions in and around who gets access to Queensland to be able to be with their dying or recently passed relatives. But there is a problem here. If I had gone on television tonight and given you in an editorial that I believe AstraZeneca is dangerous for people under the age of 60, quite rightly, people would have a problem with that. But today, on every single TV station, Dr. Jeanette Young said this, and it is contrary to the health advice of every other leading expert.
I said I didn't want 18-year-olds to have AstraZeneca, and I still don't. Even now, so if you are 60 years of age or older, go immediately and get your first dose of AstraZeneca.
60. The UK, the US, open right now in part because of a widespread use and take-up of AstraZeneca. For Australia, to get to 70%, it doesn't just have to be 70% of the country, it has to be 70% of every state that you live in. Queensland will be far later in achieving that goal if that advice remains in place. In my view, it is dangerous. It is not the view of the federal chief health officers, let alone the health officers in almost every other state. If I had said that in an editorial, there would be a problem. She can say it at a press conference and everyone runs it. And meantime, in Victoria, what about this? The Premier's Department spent the best part of a couple of $1 million making sure that people who were working for the Premier's Department of Chairman Dan, well, that they were having quite a comfortable experience while at home. Among other things, they were being sent Uber Eats and coffee vouchers because, of course, they had to do it tough. Now, of course, they didn't get their pay cut like anyone who works in the real world. None of them lost their jobs. In fact, they hired more public servants in Victoria in the past 12 months. And then, of course, they took forever if they ever returned to the office. So nice work if you can get it, right? Especially if it's other people's money. Now, to the politics, because Canberra is back up and running, socially distanced, all the rest of it. But Federal Parliament is back in session tomorrow, question time tomorrow, 2 p.m, here live on Sky News. And Each Way Albo thinks that he has got a solution to dealing with National Cabinet. Now, despite the fact that the Constitution is perhaps the biggest problem that we have had, getting a national solution when it comes to lockdowns, kids in classes, and at times vaccine rollout, Each Way Albo thinks that magically all of this will be fixed should he become the Prime Minister. Now, his belief here, according to the reporting, is that Albanese has vowed to overhaul the National Cabinet to offer a more cohesive approach, whatever that happens to be, to the pandemic if he wins power, accusing Scott Morrison of showing favouritism between the states when the country needed unity. Now, why does this matter tonight? Because, as I have said, because of the weakness of Anthony Albanese as the leader of the Labor Party. Remember, the Essential poll has him running third to don't know right now. And even in the latest news poll that showed the Labor Party with a commanding lead over the coalition 53 to 47, it was still Prime Minister Scott Morrison who was the preferred Prime Minister at 50 to 33% for Each Way Albo. Literally half of all Labor supporters say that they support Anthony Albanese as their leader, which is not a good thing if you can't get all of your people on side. So because he is such an ineffective nothing, because of his each way positions on everything, saying one thing on Monday, contradicting it on a Tuesday, think about Christine Holgate. Why won't someone do something about it? Well, it's not our fault she got sacked. I'm sorry. Well, they have been testing a little line, and that being the state Labor premiers, because they effectively act not just as the local leaders of a state government, but they're also the local federal opposition leader. Now, focus groups have apparently been done of voters in suburban Melbourne, where they are starting to parrot back what Labor politicians have been saying for a while now. That, put simply, the Prime Minister is the Prime Minister for New South Wales. Now, how do we get to this garbage? Because Labor figures have been saying this to distract from their own failures.
A Victorian government spokesman issued an astonishing statement accusing the Prime Minister of double standards for making Victoria beg for, and I quote, every scrap of support. Was it a fair point?
No, it wasn't.
Premier Andrews has said tonight that your government's refusal to provide more assistance to the state was a disgrace. Do the apparent double standards reflect the government's concern it may lose seats in New South Wales?
Well, that's a very cynical question, and the statement from Daniel Andrews, people are sick of his whinging and his politicking of the crisis.
I think Victorians have got every right to be filthy at the petty politics that is being played.
So you think New South Wales has been preferenced because they're a Liberal state and Victoria was a Labor state?
Well, they've certainly been treated differently, Fran.
Because you're being accused of not being fair. Right. Well, it's not true. The numbers just don't bear it out.
Now, you know and I know what the reality was, which is that JobKeeper had to end. The Labor Party agreed and the Labor Party voted to end JobKeeper because there were a certain section of people who simply weren't returning to the normal workforce while the payments from last year were still in place. There was a hope until the Delta strain that we wouldn't have to go through lockdowns again, so essentially an automatic standing payment for lockdowns would have been considered a financial incentive for state governments to overreact, like the situations we've seen too many times, particularly in South Australia, a Liberal state, and, of course, in Western Australia, where they think that places like the ACT are still a hotspot despite the fact that they haven't had a case of COVID for months. What ended up happening is that when Victoria went into lockdown, most recently, not most recently, the one before that, of course, they decided not to go for the local lockdown, they went for the statewide lockdown. Financial support did kick in, not on the first day, but after the first week. When New South Wales ended up in a similar scenario, they too didn't get money from day one. Instead, a system was put in place once a lockdown gets to 2 weeks, a month, or even longer. And now, with the Delta strain doing what it does and doing what it's doing right now, from day one of the lockdown in Queensland, a Labor state, you will get the same access to the same payments as everyone is getting right now in Sydney. That's the truth. The politics has been Labor governments trying to do the job that Anthony Albanese won't or can't, or even half of his own voters don't think he's actually up to. Meantime, I always like to show you crazy stuff from the United States where it feels like they turn it up to 11 and desperately try to push it to 12, 13, 14, and I think we're up to 15 right now on MSNBC when they can say garbage like this.
What happened on January 6th was an act of terrorism. That's not my words. That's the words of Christopher Wray, the FBI director. that I really urge us all to see this through the prism of terrorism. I'm Muslim. My community suffered harshly after 9/11. We were told you're either with us or you're with the terrorists. That's the same question that should go to Fox News and the Republicans. Are you with the United States or with Trump's terrorists? That's the question. It is that simple. I look at Fox News now. They are the Al Jazeera of America after 9/11. Fox News is literally having on Donald Trump, who is the Osama bin Laden of January 6th. And I can say, as a non-white person who looks white, but I'm half Arab, that the idea that the media won't call white people terrorists makes us less safe, and it's fundamentally wrong.
Oh, yeah, that video, by the way, we got it from YouTube today. And apparently in the UK, there are fundamental racism issues being dealt with by the vegan community. Who knew that apparently the term, the bloke who came up with it, and the organisation who helped spread the word of veganism, fundamental problems when it comes to racism. To talk about that, but far more important things, we have, of course, none other than the great Rowan Dean, one of the hosts, in fact, the host of The Outsiders, and you can read his stuff in The Spectator magazine, and Matt Canavan is the Senator from Queensland. And are you almost in Canberra? Are you on your way? Do you have to sit in lockdown in Rocky? What's the status right now?
Yeah, all very confusing, Paul. I am in Canberra, but I'm not allowed to come and go from the Parliament House, but for essential work. So, not sure if this show's essential or not, Paul. Maybe you can decide. So I'm coming to you from where I stay here in Canberra. Yeah.
All right, cool. All right, this bogan says it's all okay. So who knew that veganism, there was some sort of, I always sort of love the political rhetorical violence of woke on woke, but anyway, let's also get to this idea here too, where a bunch of people are trying to get the UN to put a specific carbon tax on meat. They're fairly obvious consequences to the Australian meat industry. Well, that'd be rather obvious, but of course it gets cheered on by people like the Biden Booster Network. Oh, and we got this from YouTube as well.
Is swearing off meat completely, is that the big solution here?
Well, I think some people would say yes. Those who are very sort of serious about veganism for different reasons would say yes.
So, Matt, ready for a meat tax?
How is YouTube allowing such racist content to be distributed on their platform, Paul?
Meatist.
That's the question that's got to be asked. But yeah, well, mate, just always remember here, these people that run around and scream net zero and say this is where we've got to go, that's where they want to take us. That's where they want to take us. The net zero crowd, that's who they're with. That's who they're lining up with. That's who their friends are. And that's being pushed by this. And this group in the UN are pushing, this is in their own words, they're pushing for a tax on meat. They want a tax on your steak, a tax on your barbecue. It'll be the literal barbecue stopper of Australian politics, this net zero emissions madness. And keep in mind, these are not my numbers. These are the CSIRO's numbers. They did a report a couple of years ago on what it would cost to get to net zero. They're big fans of it too. And the CSIRO say that it would cost at least a $30 a tonne price today, going up to over $200 a tonne in a few decades' time by 2050. What does that mean for your steak? Well, each cow every year emits 100 kilograms of carbon dioxide, or methane. It's 23 times as powerful, so it's 2,300 kilograms, 2.3 tonnes of methane. So you're looking at, even today, a $60 or $70 cost. Your average farmer's got about 1,000 heads, so that's a $70,000 a cost a year for a cattle producer. And by 2050, it'll grow in real dollar terms to well over $400,000 per farm. What's that going to mean to your steak? What's that going to mean when you go and swipe your ATM card at the self-serve checkout? There won't be any checkout people in 30 years' time, of course. You're at the self-serve checkout, you swipe your card, you're going to have to put your PIN in because it's going to be over $200. It'll be over the limit, and you'll have to put your PIN in thanks to these taxes.
Well, wait till they work out about human beings and what we, of course, do to the planet, Rowan. They'll come up with a new sort of people tax. But also, we've been told, of course, remember, renewable energy, ultimate solution to everything, especially those evil coal-fired power stations that, remember, catch on fire like the one that's been happening in Victoria. Well, we learned today that, of course, the alternative system here would be to have bloody big batteries everywhere. Well, like anyone who's left their computer on for perhaps a couple of days and not unplugged it, batteries get rather hot. And guess what happened today? today, there's a Victoria battery which has been burning for 3 days long, Rowan. Where's that in the renewables playbook?
Well, of course, the renewables mob never tell us about all the disasters, ecological disasters, Paul, that occur with their products. Their products are toxic. To mine the lithium and so on that goes into their products is highly toxic, not to mention the child slave labour and the exploitation in Africa and elsewhere. But the bottom line here is, Paul, we know how dangerous these large battery things are. I remember Tesla were boasting the biggest battery in the world in South Australia. Well, they had one in Arizona last year. The reports are that this is the first fire of its kind that's happened. And of course, the renewables mob say, oh, no, nothing to see here, some weird accident. But in fact, there was a similar accident last year in Arizona where nearly 4 emergency workers nearly lost their lives. These things are highly dangerous. They don't know how to put the fires out. They burn and burn and burn. You can't put water on them. There was one up in North, which was going to be built up in near Armidale, which we showed on Outsiders a few months ago. A guy called Peter Noonan contacted us and said, they're going to put one of these things down the road from us where our farm is. Beautiful part of northern New South Wales. And fortunately, those plans have now moved, fortunately for them, but they're now going to put those batteries in some other nice piece of rural property. The Chinese are making a fortune out of this stuff. They're laughing all the way to the bank as they sell us this crap. It does, and the joke is, Paul, once it's finally online, you might get a couple of hours worth of electricity if there's a storm, or maybe even only a few minutes. So it's a joke. And these things are highly toxic and dangerous.
Now, let's not retrace our steps over what we've had to say about YouTube. The world is bigger than that. But I do want to talk about big tech and anti-Semitism. Because, Rowan, a new report has shown that this is a place where an awful lot of evil can lurk. You can almost say whatever you want about Jews, and it will never get pinged in a way that other religious groups or minority groups, in terms of numbers in places like Australia, would end up getting punished or pinged.
Yeah, and for years, it's disgusting. And there's so much vile filth on all these platforms. For years, we've tolerated it because we've been told, well, there's no alternative. In the free speech world and in modern technology, there's nothing we can do about child pornography. There's nothing we can do about bestiality on the net. There's nothing we can do about anti-Semitism, which is vile and disgusting. And there's, is just there like a sewer. We've been told, no, there's nothing you can do about this. But, dare mention, an alternative treatment for COVID, and woof, you're straight off the platforms or straight off Facebook or whatever it might be. So there's clearly a fraudulent agenda here. By all means, censor these platforms. But if you're going to censor them, start with anti-Semitism and work through all the racist, vile crap that is put on there by the people that the left normally play tootsies with.
Now, also here, it's about 84% of abusive posts, nothing happens once complaints are made. The posts include absolute denialism about the Holocaust, not acted upon by Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, but no giant surprise there. Now, Matt, difficult time, but I'm going to ask you a straight question because you are a straight shooter. Right now, there are thousands of people who are Australians who can't come back to Australia, but apparently during the pandemic, 15,000 people who aren't Australians have been given citizenship in this country and thus been able to enter it. Literally, as late as today, we hear reports about thousands of people who are not able to enter the country, even if they can get a ticket, because they would be bringing somebody who is their fiancé, not their married partner, and thus potentially an Australian citizen, with them. How does this happen, where 15,000 people can, for want of a better term, buy their way in, but people who are Australians can't bring their life partner with them?
Well, Paul, if this is true, it's absolutely wrong. I'm not exactly sure whether what's been reported here is entirely accurate. It is true that we do offer citizenship for people who start businesses or invest a certain amount in our country. That's not unusual. And in normal times, I'm okay with that. If someone's going to contribute to our country, yep, look, that's the kind of people we want to become Australian. What I'm not sure here is to what extent the people approved under this scheme have been allowed to enter the country, as you say. I think some of them have already been here, so they're not necessarily taking up a quarantine place. But if that is the case, that is wrong, and it should not be happening. And we need to try and get those Australians stranded overseas home as soon as possible. It's about 40,000. The list is growing. We've been taking in lots of people, but the list continues to grow as more and more Australians want to come home and get added to the list. I think one of the most shocking decisions have been made in the last few months, as we seem to have reverted back to lockdowns and other policies, is the policies of the state governments to halve incoming Australians. Yes, quarantine is not perfect. Yes, there are outbreaks, but to leave our fellow Australians stranded overseas is just a complete reneging of what it means to be Australian, what it should mean to have a passport with a kangaroo and emu stamped on the front. You should be able to come home, and we should be doing more to get Australians home. It was reprehensible when we closed our borders to India a few months ago. To Australians, not to Indians, to Australians stranded in India. Thankfully, that didn't last too long. But look, we're just losing all perspective here, Paul, in my view. The lockdowns, the costs that are being imposed on Australians, they're just hidden and silent, while we have an obsession with the number of cases, coronavirus cases, that is leading us to make decisions that impose massive costs on small businesses and people who aren't lucky enough to be in the laptop class and work from home like me.
Yeah, good point. I mean, Rowan, it is this thing where we know the states turn around and say, we'll only take X number of people into hotel quarantine. And I know that there are airlines, I'm not joking here, that they get told caps per flight, right? So the flight's still landing here because of the cargo that's inside the plane. I hate to educate some of these state premiers, but that's how stuff turns up in Australia, by the way. They have been given caps of only being allowed to have 7 passengers on board while they're flying back. Ridiculous.
Yeah, it is ridiculous, and I just echo what Matt was saying. Of course, we want Australians brought back, safely, obviously, and it's obviously a difficult decision. But at the same time, we do need to keep our economy going somehow or other, and we seem to be so busy shutting down everything in our economy. At some point, hate to tell Josh Frydenberg and others, we are going to run out of money if we haven't already. So. If we are encouraging people to bring money into the country, okay, let's do it safely. But I don't see it's a major problem if it is leading to jobs in Australia.
China will stop lending us money. That's what will happen, Rowan. That's where we keep financing it. We can borrow from China at the moment, so it's all fine.
Yeah.
All right, lads,
exactly.
Do appreciate it. We'll talk to you all again soon. All the best for whatever is considered essential business in Canberra, which I'm sure is responding to Greens motions and all the rest of it. Thank you, mate. Do appreciate it. Thank you, Senator. Thank you, Rowan. Now, Australia is, of course, having an absolute belter Olympics right now. Matt Carroll is the bloke who is part of the AOC, their chief executive, who not only has an eye on these games, but he knows what's coming our way in about 11 years' time. But the logistical nightmare of getting everyone to Tokyo is one thing. Well, now people start coming home. Matt joins us now. Matt, firstly, congratulations on what has been an amazing games thus far.
Oh, it's great, and I think what's really good is for the Australian people in this lockdown and all the other issues. It's a bit of inspiration and a bit of encouragement. No, I think it's been fantastic, and the results aren't just about necessarily the medals, but also the athletes who have done well in their personal best and contributed to the whole great result of the games so far. Another week to go. We'll see what happens.
Yeah, absolutely. And all of the little stories that are in and amongst it now, there's always, obviously, there's the headline sports. I spend plenty of time checking out on the app things like, weightlifting and boxing and all these other different things. And they're all sort of awesome to see Australians make it, onto the stage, let alone even onto the podium. But now we've got the logistical issue of people coming home. The swimmers are on their way back. I was surprised that 1 or 2 of them wasn't going to stay to be the closing ceremony flag people, but who knows how this actually works. So logistically, let's say our swim team. Where does the swim team land? Where will they spend 2 weeks?
Right. Well, there's 850 Australians coming back and they've started coming back already. The rowers and there's about over 200 back already. Because you have to leave the village within 48 hours of completion of your competition. So they're about roughly, because it varies, because obviously, tonight we've got the Matildas on. If the Matildas keep winning, they'll stay a bit longer. They lose. Sadly for the women's hockey team today, when they lost today, they come home earlier. So we've got to manage these numbers of returnees. It's a little bit complicated, but we get there. We've got great support from the Commonwealth and the States. So around about 400 go into New South Wales, about 200 in Queensland, about 200 into the Howard Springs Centre in Darwin, and in Perth they're going to take the 2 hockey teams. So we're spreading the load across the quarantine system. We've worked with the states and with the Commonwealth government. They're all above the cap. is not taking any quarantine spaces from any other returning Australian.
It's a chance you heard our previous discussion. I wasn't going to ask about that, but my assumption was this was on top of all of that. Is it a system where we're talking about the established hotels, or you've been able to come up with a resort that you've been able to, say, rent for a few weeks so you can get hundreds of people into one place like the AFL did, like the NRL has done?
Well, different to the AFL and NRL, we've actually got an event which is overseas. It's not in Australia. And as I just said, we have to have people coming back as soon as they finish their competitions. So that means in the first few days after games started, we had like 3 or 4 people coming back. So it's not enough for a whole charter. We have 3 charters. 2 will go into Darwin, 1 will go into Brisbane. But to stand up a hotel for the entire period, which would require, at the peak time, we have 840 athletes and officials in quarantine, was not possible. It was just unaffordable. And also, we didn't want to be in one city because it's important we're trying to get the athletes and the officials into the city where they live, because of the current border closures between states as well. So the better way to do it was just a standard quarantine system. We've discussed it with negotiated and discussed with the state governments of New South Wales, Queensland and Western Australia, and a small number going into Victoria and South Australia. So it takes a load off each of the states, because we're very respectful of that. They go into standard quarantine as per any returning Australian.
Now, Sydney had 7 years to prepare for the Olympic Games after the successful bid. Brisbane has 11 years. You ready for the long run? 11 years of what's ahead for the Olympic movement in Australia?
Well, it's not just the Olympic movement. The great thing is the 10 plus 10. 10 years in, past that half a year we've got. But 2022 to 2032, a great opportunity for Australia, not just for the Olympic movement, but for Australian sport. There's a whole lot of other international events already scheduled, about 30 of them for that period. But it's also an opportunity to, build participation in sport, address the other pandemic, which is obesity, mental health, all those sorts of things that sport can help working with governments and the communities to achieve for Australia. And yes, at the end of it is that 2032 opportunity. And we have to start now. You don't start building a team for 2032 a couple of years before the Games or even the Los Angeles Games in 2028. So there's plenty to do over the next 10 years.
Good stuff. All right, congratulations again on the team and the successful bid as well. Nice to talk to you, Mike. All the best.
Indeed. Thank you very much.
Good man. Matt Carroll, sorry, not Mike. My apologies, sir. More in a sec here on Paul Murray Live, where we're going to have a chat with the wonderful Nicole Flint, the equally wonderful, beguiling at times, would I even say, Sam Crosby. Next here on Paul Murray Live. Sorry. Time now for our mates on a Monday night. None other than Sam Crosby, and of course the wonderful member for Boothby is none other than the delightful Nicole Flint. Sorry, Sam, she'll always get a better intro than you. Nicole, of course, you're back there for the essential and vital work in the hotspot that is the ACT with 0 cases.
We sure are.
Yeah. All right, let's get to some things today, including Each Way Albo's decided that National Cabinet doesn't work, and that's because there's not enough love in the room, and all you need is a change in Prime Minister, and suddenly there would be love in the room. Suddenly all of the states would come together, and certainly there would no longer be favouritism for New South Wales. Sam, do you honestly believe that right now, when in a couple of nights into what's been happening in the lockdown in Queensland, the same financial payments to those that are in New South Wales that, of course, were developed in the second week of what was happening in Victoria lockdown 4.0, not 5.0, that really it's all about New South Wales?
Oh, well, I mean, let's get real, Paul. I mean, the feds have not come to the table at all with JobKeeper 2.0. I mean,
it's the same amount of money.
No. But put it to one side, whether it's the right amount, a different amount, whatever. The point is that it is woefully insignificant. I mean, just talk to any of those poor buggers who have closed down their jobs, closed down their businesses. I mean, people are literally on the bones of their ass, and we're scribbling about should it be this level of government or that level of government. I mean, at the end of the day, the federal government has 87% of every tax dollar goes to the feds. They should be paying 87% of the welfare going to businesses and workers who are queuing at every Centrelink around the country.
Right, but they don't have 86% of the say about a lockdown, about what it affects, about how long it is. And the states themselves, Nicole, put their hands up to say workers, income that is lost, federal responsibility, business support, state. That's what the states wanted. And I screamed blue murder about how terrible the financial support has been from state governments. But if that's the talking point, they need a better one, don't they? And supposedly this all Prime Minister for New South Wales garbage. Have I got the blinders on? What can I not see here?
No, you're not missing anything at all, Paul. This is a classic case of the states blaming Canberra for everything. The states have made the decisions to lock down. The states have spent a tiny amount of money compared to the federal government in terms of support throughout the last 18 months, throughout the coronavirus pandemic. And I'd just say Albo is dreaming if he thinks that if he became Prime Minister, that he could have a cohesive cabinet, national cabinet that would be binding, decisions would be binding. I think Albo needs to borrow a copy of my constitution. I've got one in my office. I'm just down the hallway from his. I'm happy to drop it around. We're a federation. The states will do whatever they jolly well like, as they're currently demonstrating.
Correct, which is frustrating. We're seeing that in real time. So I get it. And I know that there's this talking point that, state leaders reinforce. So political strategy as it goes, we'll see what happens. But what about this? The New South Wales local government elections, which are due in a few months' time, they have now been cancelled because of the pandemic. Of course, they had council elections in Queensland and Victoria, even during the pandemic. But now there's even discussions about the Electoral Commission thinking about all of the logistical nightmares about potential lockdowns and the rest of it for next year's federal election. Now, Nicole, I remember when there was a bloke, he was a rather orange-hued guy, who at one point was talking about maybe delaying an American election because of a pandemic. And of course, that was undemocratic. But then there was this Sheila from New Zealand who actually delayed an election in New Zealand due to the pandemic. And that wasn't a problem. So what's Australia going to do here? And why is the AEC telling us now that on election night, don't expect many results because everyone's got to be 1.5 metres away from each other. So this will go for days and days and days, even though presumably they'd all be fully vaccinated.
They jolly well should be by, March or May next year, if that's when the election is, Paul. Look, the AEC have, let's say, 6-8 months at least to plan for the next election. We have businesses out there across Australia dealing with different rules and regulations every single day that they have to pivot and adapt to, change their staffing, change the number of people that are allowed in or out. They do that whilst losing money. I reckon if our business community can get it right, then the AEC certainly can. And as for saying they're going to need another $30 million, well, I think that they should be operating within their current budget because we have businesses out there having to do that every single day.
Yeah, I mean, Sam, look, I get it. Ambit claims they always want a little bit more money for what they're doing. This is the mob who, remember, had to have a revote of the Western Australian Senate election a couple of elections ago because, remember, all of those ballots that there were particular problems with. Now, look, I get it. There's a logistical nightmare in place.
Well,
But we're not going to delay the freaking election.
They just lost the ballots.
Yeah.
In WA, they just lost them. It was like a couple of thousand votes. It was just went missing.
Yeah, correct. There was just pallets that, boom, anyway.
What? Just gone.
Yeah, correct. But it's the thing. We should not, look, we don't have a fixed date system at the federal level. No one wants that changed, regardless of what side of politics you're on. But I think they're having a lend, pretending that in the first half of next year, they're not going to be able to hold an election with everyone standing 1.5 metres apart.
Yeah. Look, I think Nicole's absolutely right. For starters, you can't change the election, right? It's got to be by May next year. Mm-hmm. And for God's sakes, if the AEC can't get their act together between now and May, they are doing something seriously, seriously wrong with themselves. I think this is a good opportunity. Like, let's move to an electronic style system that has a paper backup so that if, Russia or whoever hacks us, you can follow the paper ballot, you can follow the paper trail. But, let's figure out how to move to an online system like that so that we're not still, drawing ones and zeros in on paper ballots in 2022.
Well, here's an even better idea where we shouldn't have preferential voting. I reckon you just if you want to, just walk in and vote one. Oh, that's right. The Greens, the Labor, they couldn't possibly change that system. Now,
Paul, any time a government tries to change the preferential voting system to benefit themselves, it always blows back and hurts them. And I tell you what, it was the New South Wales Labor government that did that way back in the day, because the Nats and the Libs were fighting each other, and we thought, oh, this is brilliant. Let's do a first past the post system, and it blew up in our face. So I speak from some degree of wisdom here. Don't try to fiddle with an election system to benefit yourself in the immediate term. You've got the preferential system, just sit with it.
I'll give you the tip. When you need 3 of the 5 minor party votes to get anything passed in the parliament without the support of Labor and the Greens, good luck getting them to sign away to a just one above the line system. That'd have to be Team Red and Team Blue agreeing on the change, which I don't think may happen between now and the election. Now, can I just make a rather bold prediction here? The census, which is happening in the next couple of weeks, something will go wrong with it. It always does, particularly the giant logistical stuff. And we remember what happened 4 years ago when everyone tried to log on to that website at once, because, Malcolm Turnbull was awesome. But there is a question, as always, and there is a group of people who desperately would love to see the number of Australians with faith fall below 50%. Now, at the last census, I can tell you, 60.3% of Australians said that they had faith. The majority of those, about 52% of that 60%, were Christians. Now, as you know, I'm an atheist, so I'm in that 30% range that have no religion. But I do love the number of people who constantly want to find a way to either fiddle the question, reinterpret the question. Really, it's about how many times you've been to church, not what you might have been baptised, as a way of pushing that number down. Because, Nicole, what they desperately want is to somehow prove that Australia doesn't care about the big fella, the big Sheila, whatever, whoever, wherever. But the truth is that the majority of Australians do.
That's right, Paul. It looks to me like a new and interesting way to further try and erase religion from our lives and from our nation. I'd just be interested to know how many rationalists there are out there in the community, because I'm guessing it's not very many.
Yeah, correct. Now, Sam, again, logistically, something's going to go wrong with the census, right? Obviously, the physical capacity to get around Greater Sydney or Greater Brisbane right now and physically rat-a-tat-tat on people's doors, not going to happen, all right? The online system, hopefully they've bought a few extra servers since this time last time. But the religion question, I always love, and, often there's little pieces here, in the Turnbull Times or on the taxpayer media, what they really mean is this. They don't mean whether you believe it or not. It's just about how into it you are. Don't fiddle it. Just deal with the reality of what people come back with.
Yeah, and every demographer worth their salt will tell you, no, just leave the questions the same. You want the same questions asked 100%. Year in, year out, year in, year out, to see what the changes are. To see between 1991 and now what's actually happened. It's not about fiddling the results, for heaven's sakes. You're absolutely right. Just leave the questions where they are.
Yeah. Now, I should tell you too, 1966, faith was 88% of Australians, and yes, now it is at 60% of Australians. At some point, most likely, it'll tip. But, keep the questions as they are. Stop trying to find a different way to get a different damn result. Now, how do you guys feel about the legalisation of marijuana? Because studies have shown here, and there's a study around today suggesting that if it was a legalised product and thus created tax, billions of dollars like they have for tobacco, it would, of course, explode the number of people who are using it. Nicole, how do you feel about the legalisation of a product like marijuana, if nothing else, for the taxation implications? I say this, by the way, as a cigar smoker, not a pot smoker.
I am vehemently opposed to the legalisation of marijuana, Paul. The study showed that a hugely increased number of people would try it for the first time. Heavy users would use even more. And we know there are some really serious irreversible health risks, including psychosis, schizophrenia for people who are predisposed to those very serious mental health conditions and may not even know that they're predisposed. So, and as a Liberal on the tax front, I'm all about lower taxes, not introducing new taxes.
I agree. Lower taxes on tobacco. That's all I heard, Nicole. Lower taxes on tobacco. I agree. No, see, she's not even going to react. She's not even going to nod. Not even going to nod. I love it.
No, Paul, I gave a speech in Parliament saying that we absolutely should reduce the tax on tobacco, because what we have created created is an illegal market. So the government's actually losing a huge amount of taxation.
Yeah,
I'm on
Nicole,
Han's side, I'm on the public record on this one.
But Nicole, that same logic doesn't apply to pot?
No, it doesn't, because of the serious health risks and the fact that you'd have so many more people
serious health risks
using
with tobacco?
it.
Yeah, but hang on. So are you suggesting, Sam, that there should be a legalisation of pot, or that there should be the banning of tobacco like they've got in New Zealand?
I'm just loving Nicole get tied up with her own logical...
No, it's your turn now. It's your turn now. Come on, it's your turn now.
I'm fine to explore this. I genuinely am. I mean, look at it in America, right? So for years there's been this debate about pot, and where we say, it's either causing schizophrenia or people with pre-existing conditions are self-medicating with schizophrenia. And no one's been able to resolve this debate for 50, 60 years, right? Well, you can see in a real-life trial that's going on in California, in New York, in Colorado was the first one. Well, the numbers of schizophrenia, they're not increasing commensurate to the number of people smoking pot. So, look, I've never smoked pot. I can happily hand on heart say. I'm not going to start, but I'm kind of okay with a limited trial. Maybe say in the ACT, they've been keen on this for a while.
Well, Sam,
and see what happens.
Well, look, this may not surprise people, as I say. I don't smoke pot, but I'm wearing a velvet jacket, right? Which is the ultimate data is to see what's happening in the United States. We will see, right? We will see whether there has been the mixed psychosis and all the rest of it out of places like Colorado, California that have all put it in place. I don't think we need to be rushing to make a decision in Australia, but it'll be interesting to see what that data is. And in the meantime, lower the taxes on tobacco. Thank you very much. Do appreciate it. Thank you, Sam. Thank you, Nicole. We'll see you again next week. Straight after the break, I want to talk to our mate Jacinta Price, because there's been protests at the Olympics, yes, where apparently it is all about race. Straight talk from a great lady next here on Paul Murray Live. Thank you so much for watching, wherever you happen to be. We've got a great panel for you as well this evening to talk about lots of different issues. The wonderful Jacinta Price, who is, of course, Senate candidate coming up at that next federal election, fingers crossed. In the meantime, the Deputy Lord Mayor of Alice Springs, Garth Hamilton, is a Liberal MP as well. Now, Garth, you get to stay in Toowoomba and you've got to zoom into the Parliament tomorrow, or what's happening for you?
That's right, Paul. I got paired out with all this chaos going on, but it's not too bad. I get a little bit of extra time around my electorate.
Yeah, it doesn't really hurt, right? If you had to choose between Toowoomba or Canberra in winter,
bravest place in the world, Paul.
Yeah, I think everyone wins, especially, of course, Jacinta right now in Alice Springs. So the Olympics has made a decision that I think is unnecessary, which is to tell all athletes you're not allowed to do any sort of protests or anything like that during medal ceremonies or anything else. Now, of course, somebody was always going to do it. Inevitably, they will be loved by Twitter, and if there's any sanction that's put upon these people, well, then you can understand that that's going to cause World War III, right? Let me introduce you to a Sheila called Raven Saunders. Now, Raven Saunders is 25. She is outspoken, apparently, they say. She is gay. She is black. She struggled with depression in the past. She says she wants to be me and not to apologise. Well, she decided to do an X symbol above her head, which, and I want to make sure I get this right here, the X is the intersection of where all people who are oppressed meet. So, Jacinta, first part of the question, do you care about protests at the Olympics, and what the hell does the X mean?
Well, I think this protesting business, we've got to the point now where it's lost much of its meaning. I mean, are people really paying attention now to people? You know, there's this conversations about intersectionality. I think humans in general are probably over this idea of what intersectionality is, because we're all human beings, right? And I mean, if this particular individual has suffered from depression and mental health issues, well, this is all part of the human condition. You don't have to be part of a minority group or, you know, or someone who's relates to intersectionality or race or whatever it is, to understand or have been through depression and suffered from mental health concerns and issues. So it could be any human being, really. And I mean, I know I'm just a bit over, these sorts of protests that pop up. I mean, it's almost as though there are those who are more into having their own 15 seconds of fame than anything else. I mean, what it accomplishes for those people she claims to stand up for, who knows? But as I said, mental health issues, yes, any human being can relate to mental health issues and depression and issues like that. And there are ways forward. There's lots of information out there to deal with those sorts of things. So it's like, protest. Here we go again. That's I think that's what most people are feeling these days.
Yeah, well, there was that Simone Biles, a gymnast in the United States, who basically said, look, mental health issues, I'm out of the games. I sort of stand by what I said last week, which was, part of the joy of sport is that it is binary. There is winning and losing. Part of how you build your profile and make money in the lead up to games is expectation of success, and post games is about the success that you were able to have on that one day every 4 years. But what we also see now is that you can be a millionaire who can simultaneously be success or victim and all the rest of it, Jacinta. And that's what kind of, I've got to say, changes the expectation of people when they're watching things like this, which is I want to watch it because I want to see these people at the peak of their life every 4 years. In the United States, because so many of these athletes are woke, and that's where she's from, ratings are way down. Some of the worst Olympic ratings they've ever had in the US. Time zones might be part of that too. But my thing is, if they want to protest, good luck to them. Don't go and sanction them, because all that happens then is that you turn them into the multi-million-dollar martyr.
Yeah, well, that's right. You do. You turn them into a martyr. And I think, what people are interested in, most certainly when it comes to things like the Olympic Games, is that those people representing their country are representing everybody from their country. They're there because of their skill and their ability as a human being. They're not there because of their race. They're not there because of their gender. That's what they're there for their ability. And the fact that while they're there, they are in fact representing every human being from the country that they come from. Yeah. And that's what we're all interested in. And look, you're right. Let's not turn them into martyrs. If they're just left to their own devices, then I think you take the wind out of their sails, basically.
Well, also, let's be honest, Garth, I'm not entirely sure how many endorsement deals there are in the world of shot put, so perhaps you have to come up with other ways to get attention. But again, if somebody wants to make a stand, cool, good luck to them, whatever. I don't think the IOC needs to be jumping on top of them, regardless of how eye-rolling these sorts of things can be. But they will accuse us of just being two white dudes who don't get it.
Maybe I don't get it, Paul. I just like sport. I think the Olympics is about sport. I don't care what your skin colour is, who you love, how you love them. This Olympics, we've been able to see a bloke with a mullet run bloody fast, and that's been fantastic. But seriously, is there any less oppressed person on earth than an Olympic athlete? I mean, these people cook for them, their lives are laid out for them, nice fancy uniforms, shoe deals, all this sort of stuff. Apart from the anti-sex beds, it sounds like a pretty good deal. I don't know what this complaint particularly is about, but look, goodness me, if you're going to complain, go for it. But I'm there for the sport, Paul.
Now, I was just talking before to the bloke from the AOC about all the plans to bring back. Do you know how hard I had to bite my tongue to say, can they use the condoms they can't use in the village in the 2 weeks of quarantine? I had to so hard, but I get credit for not bringing it up then. Alas, I do now, though. Jacinta, the Indigenous voice to Parliament, the Labor Party would like it in the Constitution. The current Indigenous Affairs Minister, Ken Wyatt, says that it won't actually pass the Parliament before the next election. So I'm not entirely sure how many votes flip about it existing or whether it goes into the Constitution, but it'll be one of the fault lines of the upcoming election. Do you think it's a failure of the government to have not got this done by now?
I don't think it's one of these things that should be rushed. Personally, I've been concerned about what it actually is. I mean, you can't argue to have it put in the Constitution when the vast majority of Australians don't even know what the voice to Parliament is, or what it entails, or how it operates. So I think it was, always a safer bet to legislate it. But even still, I don't think Australians necessarily completely understand what it all means. I don't think marginalised Indigenous Australians in remote communities, in fact, know exactly what it means. And I still agree. It is my belief that we have a system in place already. We have a democracy. We have elections, federal elections and state and territory elections, and we have candidates that go up who there are those of us of Indigenous heritage who are voices, if you like. We're supposed to understand, Indigenous Australians. We're at least supposed to understand and represent our electorate, and I still think that is the best system we have by far. And this idea of a voice to Parliament, I guess it's almost like an attempt at reinventing the wheel, if you like. So because I haven't seen such a thing in action, I can't tell whether it's going to be successful or not. And it still concerns me that I don't think this is necessarily the way to go in terms of trying to better the lives of Indigenous Australians. I think we keep ignoring why we have issues being, that particularly marginalised Indigenous Australians are faced with. And once we start being a bit more honest about those issues and the causes of those issues, I think we should just treat Aboriginal Australians like everyone else, Australian citizens, and treat our issues as you would any Australian citizen.
Garth, there is a debate right now about whether employers have the right to tell everyone who works for them that they have to be vaccinated. I noticed there's some news floating around tonight about major business groups who would like the government to pass legislation to empower bosses to be able to say you have to have the jab to be able to keep your job. How do you feel about this? I think it's a conversation we don't have to go anywhere near. Personally at all, but do you think there's a time when we have to get to that conversation if the rollout stalls at 45% or 50% on our way to 70%?
Well, before this conversation happens, I think we should just all have a look at the world we're in right now. For the last 20 years, Paul, working as an engineer, if I wanted to work in water treatment plants, I had to get vaccinated to do the job. If I wanted to work on mine sites in remote parts of the world, I had to get vaccinated. Now, I'm speaking to my little mate, Bill Thompson from Townsville today. He reminds me that if you work in the Army, if you're in the Army, before you can be deployed, guess what? You have to have a vaccination. If it's good enough for our Army blokes, probably good enough for the rest of us. So I think there's something we need to appreciate. This approach of vaccination as required for specific jobs has been going for a long, long time, Paul. We're just new to this party. But this has been here for a long time. So I think we need to take that into account. There's potentially some people maybe getting on this a bit late in the day.
Yeah, also on vaccinations too, and we'll talk about this a little bit later. Labor Party has just announced a policy. They want $300 for every person who has been vaccinated or will be vaccinated between now and December the 1st, because, money doesn't matter, right? But I'll talk about that in greater detail a little bit later. Jacinta, do you think that laws need to be passed, if that is required, for bosses to be empowered to say, you have to get the jab to do this job?
Oh, look, I'm with Garth on this one. I think I would hate to be working in a situation where where I'm taking care of vulnerable individuals, and I would certainly hate to be responsible for passing on any kind of disease, I guess, to a vulnerable individual. And those specific cases like that, I think it should be it is certainly the responsibility of somebody working in those sorts of areas to ensure that they can't be responsible for passing on any kind of disease. And Garth's absolutely right. There are already jobs where it's a requirement to be vaccinated. We have, if you travel overseas in particular countries, you can't travel until you are vaccinated against certain things. So, it does make sense in many ways. And I think if we're looking at protecting vulnerable Australians, then I'm for it. I'm for ensuring that people are protected.
Now, a bunch of smarty pants, political scientist types have tried to get together to work out who they think is the best Prime Minister in the history of Australia. Their winner was John Curtin, with a lot of people ranking him as the best Prime Minister, followed by Hawke, Deakin, Chifley, Menzies, Keating, Whitlam, Fisher, Howard, Barton. How do we feel about that? Apart from the fact that most of them are Labor, but anyway, how do we feel about that, Garth? That John Curtin at number one, fairly obvious about why, about the pivot towards protecting Australia as opposed to defending Europe. But what about the fact that Keating and Whitlam have outranked Howard?
Well, let's just for a moment applaud the amazing restraint shown by The Guardian in not putting Whitlam number one. I mean, we know that was their choice, right? That was like Ulysses tying himself to the mast. That's incredible. But look, I mean, what have they got? Hawke above Menzies, is that right?
Yep, absolutely.
Keating above Howard?
Yep.
Come on. Look, that's just... Are they trying to win the competition for the stupidest thing said today? It's ridiculous.
Now,
I haven't got anything witty there. That's just dumb.
No, I'm with you. Now, look, it's easy for people to turn around and say, well, the Prime Minister that I lived through is the one that I automatically rank higher. But over the historical achievements of the country, Curtin over Hawke, over Deakin, over Chifley, over Menzies, over Keating, over Whitlam, over Fisher, over Howard.
Yeah, look, as you mentioned, they're a bunch of smarty pantsers, right? So, I don't think, again, each Prime Minister served at their particular time and had a certain set of issues before them when they served. And I don't think you can actually rate Prime Ministers based on the fact that they were serving at different times. Of course, Curtin, led the country through the war with Japan, and that got us through, obviously. Menzies set Australia up to become very prosperous, and his government, followed by many other coalition governments, extended full citizenship rights to Aboriginal people by the end of the 60s. Ended up, setting things up for the passing of the Anti-Land Rights Act, which, of course, the Fraser government ended up passing by 76. Hawke and Keating, of course, made us economically competitive internationally, but Howard was certainly a leader of his principles and continued that foundational work of Menzies, also Hawke and Keating, and he also strengthened our borders and did something huge about gun control. He did some wonderful things. I mean, I have to say I'm a bit of a Howard fan, but like I said, I think that our Prime Ministers served at the times that they did with the set of issues that was before them at that time. So ranking them like that is obviously something that some smarty pantsers would do.
I think we can all agree that Karen Rudd and the Ghost nowhere near the top 10. Thank you, Garth. Thank you, Jacinta. It's not me talking, it's the experts at the Turnbull Times. Aren't you glad you created them, Malcolm? All right. Thank you, guys. Thanks, Paul. Appreciate it. Thank you. We'll talk to you very soon. All right. In a second, we're going to have a chat to Evan Mulholland from the IPA about how the fat cats, well, they were living large during the pandemic that affects so many different people. And I've just done the quick rough sums here. So the Labor Party's idea is $300 to everyone who's fully vaccinated. That's about 20 million people potentially who would be fully vaccinated. Total cost, $6 billion. Is there a problem Albo won't throw money at? We're in a second.